All right, so we're going to talk about Job 1 and 2. Many of you probably know the story of Job. Job is a man, very successful. He's got 10 children, a wife. He's got many goods, and all of a sudden he loses everything. And if you've read Job 1 and 2, you see that in that passage, Job is the object of the adversary, the Satan, in Hebrew, or Shatan, Ha-Shatan, to be perfectly accurate about it. The Satan says, this guy Job, he serves you because of everything that you've done for him. Now this is the crux of the matter in Job, right? Job is a biblical book that is dialoguing with another book. And the other book is the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy basically lays out, especially in chapters 27 and 28, that if you do good, God will bless you. And if you do badly, God will take everything away. And there's a sense in which this makes sense. There's a sense in which what the writer of the book of Deuteronomy is doing is offering an imprimatur, a divine imprimatur, or approval. Okay, that's what imprimatur is, for right living. And right living means working hard. It means taking care of your business. To quote Bachman Turner Overdrive from the 70s. Taking care of business, all right? And if you take care of business, then everything's going to work out okay. Job did take care of business, and things were working out okay. And the Satan here exposes the flaw in the logic, because there are sometimes when we do everything right and things still do not turn out okay. So a couple of you in some of your threaded discussions and responses to other students have articulated references to movies that you like, and a movie quote that you thought was especially fitting for responding to something in the threaded discussion. Let me just say, I love that kind of thing. I love where we find ways to find connections in popular culture. So I'm going to try to do that with you now. One of my favorite, many of us, one of our favorite family movies to watch at Christmas time is Christmas Vacation. And there's this scene where Ruby Sue, Chevy Chase's little niece, finds him looking out the back window. He's dreaming about this pool that he wants to put in, but he hasn't gotten his bonus yet. And so they have a dialogue about Santa Claus. And little Ruby Sue says that she thinks all that Santa business is just a lot of hooey. Now that's not exactly what she says, but that's what she means. It's not real. It's phony, right? And it's for this reason. She says, last year we didn't do nothing wrong and we still got the shaft. That, my friends, is the start of the book of Job. When you read Job's story, he didn't do nothing wrong, and he still gets the shaft. And then, one of the things that we talk about is that God is somehow complicit in this, because God knows Job's heart, even though Job, interestingly enough, kind of goes on a path of self-discovery about his own heart. But we'll leave that aside for a moment. So Job dialogues with Deuteronomy. Job, that book, is all about suffering. It's about how the human person deals with suffering, because the thing that makes Job powerful is that the suffering is undeserved. Job did things right. And so for me, that is, from a theological perspective, I think pretty important, pretty foundational to what I think about when I think about suffering. Suffering is when things go wrong, not just a risky real estate investment that goes bad, but when you've ordered your life in such a way, you've tried to take care of yourself, for example, right? and you have a heart attack at 50 when you are in, otherwise the picture of health, other than that heart attack you just had, right? You're the picture of health. What does that do? How does it play with your mind, with your emotions, with your psyche when that happens? If Job had been an evil person and lost everything, or had never had anything, then that would be in perfect keeping with the book of Deuteronomy. There's no conflict. There's no problem here. The problem is that Job was a righteous man. And this book is about exposing the flaw in that logic. What happens when life does not work out the way you think it should, or the way the rules tell you it should? On the converse, right, there's this other side. And that is that sometimes evil people succeed. And what do we do with that? Suffering is about, in my view, this theological matrix through which I view it. Suffering is about something different than just the loss of health or the loss of goods or the loss of life even. Suffering is about dealing with an emotional response, a psychological response to a particular problem or problems, right? So we can think of all kinds of examples from our own world. It would be hard not to think about the Holocaust, right? It would be hard not to think about Rwanda. It would be hard not to think about apartheid. It would be hard not to think about the gulags, right? It would be hard not to think about all these things. It would be hard not to think about the internment camps. It would be hard not to think about the treatment of Native Americans, right? It would be hard not to think about those things. It's not just in the act of one nation in conflict with another, or one people in conflict with another. It's what happens on the inside, how we internalize that, how our minds deal with that. That's where the suffering happens. This wasn't supposed to happen to me, says Job. His wife makes it worse because she says, curse God and die, because, buddy, he's working you over. He's treating you bad, right? And so there's this God dimension. How does the human person relate to the divine in the middle of suffering? And what then is hope? Now we're going to talk about hopefulness in another time. But what then is hope? How do we deal with hope in the middle of suffering and compassion? How do all those things work together? And that's the path of discovery that we're on. So just some introductory comments about Job. Please read Job 1 and 2 if you haven't already. Read it through, my lens, right? We all have a lens. Try to read it through my lens for a moment and see if it makes any sense to you. All right, we'll be back in just a little bit, and we'll talk about Luke 4:18.